Welcome to Lessons Learned, a new podcast that I've been considering for some time now. Before we begin today's premiere, let me tell you what I hope the premise of these podcast series will be all about. In the summer of 2014, my mother, at the young age of 97 and a half, suffered a stroke that left her blind and confined to bed for the rest of her life, an additional 11 weeks. It was during those 11 weeks when I moved in with her that I got to know her better, and I got to know her through her neighbors, her friends, and our relatives. I was very lucky to have that time with her because I learned a lot of lessons. We all learn lessons, and with this podcast, it's about the lessons we have learned and how they impact our lives. There are parents, teachers, clergy, siblings, and friends. Weekly, when I podcast with my brother Gary, just for the spell of it, I learn more about him, the game of Scrabble, as well as life's little lessons that are hidden in the game. So today, it is obvious my first guest is my big brother Gary. And as the story goes, he's my big brother, 8 years older than me, because I pushed him out first. I wanted to be the youngest. So here we are. We're going to talk to Gary today about the lessons he's learned and who taught him those lessons.
Oh my, I think I've learned everything. And there have been different people along the way that were special and helped guide me. Our mother was one of those people. She had a strong work ethic. And as I was growing up, she was always encouraging me to find something to do, to work, to earn a little money. And then she showed me how to open a savings account. And when I sort of tailed off in some of my projects, she was always there to push me and to remind me, and then even to help me. One of the ways she helped me was when I was probably 10, 11, 12, I had a paper route. I actually was very ambitious and sometimes had 2 or 3 paper routes at the same time. I had a morning free press route in Detroit. Free press had 2 editions, early morning and evening. And to do the morning route, my papers were dropped off as early as 5:30, 6 a.m.
Wow.
And I had to go out, get the papers, fold them up. So I put them in my paper bag, put that on the bike, and then drive and throw the papers onto the porches. But living in Detroit, Michigan, I'm sure you remember, once it turned November or December, it got really cold.
Right.
We had our share of snow, and I still had the obligation to go out and deliver those papers. So on many occasions, when it was especially bad, Mom got up in the middle of the night, threw on a jacket over her nightgown. We got in the car, and I would get the papers and I would throw them from the car, I guess. But I remember that she wouldn't let me make excuses for not delivering the papers. And then the other part of that job was collecting the money. I didn't like collecting the money for some reason. And she couldn't understand why I didn't want the money. And she would push me extremely hard so that I would do that part of the job.
Sure.
Because whether I collected it or not, I had to pay the person who gave me the papers every week. And if she hadn't pushed me, I don't know where I would have gotten the money to pay him, but that um, wasn't my favorite part at all. I don't know why, because I ended up with a profit. And so she was key at doing that. But, well, I guess that's all I want to say about that. But I had many different people through my lifetime, as I'm sure everybody has, who has made a big difference. Um, I was in the Boy Scouts, and uh, I'm Jewish, as you and many of the people know. So at 13, I was having a bar mitzvah,
Right.
and mom and dad thought that it would be really nice if I would pursue a special award that was offered in the Boy Scouts. It's called the Ner Tamid Award. Ner Tamid is a light that hangs over the ark where the Torah is stored. And this, in order to earn this, one had to follow a guide that was provided, but you had to work with a rabbi. And I ended up working with Rabbi Erwin Groner, who at the time was the junior rabbi at Congregation Sharet Tzedek. And that was a miraculous experience because even though I was Jewish and I thought I understood things, I had to go in depth and learn about all of the holidays and the significance and the history. And I sat with him maybe an hour a week for maybe as long as 2 months, 3 months, until I completed all the pieces of the puzzle. And then I was awarded the Ner Tamid Award at my bar mitzvah in the synagogue when I was bar mitzvah.
Got it.
And that was very, very special. And uh, I became very involved with the youth groups. And again, mom and dad were very key in supporting me and pushing me in that direction because it kept me off the streets.
Right.
Not that I had a tendency to go with the rougher crowd out on the streets, but it guided my life and my values, and that was all.
Through them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
very
so let,
special.
so let me ask you this question. It was mom and dad's influence, obviously, that you go for the Ner Tamid Award. Um, and if I'm thinking of parents, not just our parents, but parents want that extra special feeling that their child has achieved something. Um,
Sure.
but you didn't get bar mitzvahed at Sharet Tzedek. So
No,
what led you to Rabbi Groner rather than being at our own synagogue?
I needed to have someone who would participate with me
Got it.
and be my mentor. And at the time, at Beth Aaron, where I was bar mitzvah, the rabbi was Rabbi Gorelick, who was older and wasn't as personable. I'm sure he had all the knowledge to work with me, but somewhere along the line, I got shifted. And at the time, Groner was a junior rabbi,
Sure.
so I guess he had more time available.
So, and
Um,
it's interesting, and I'd like our listeners to understand this, that sometimes the path that we think we're going to take isn't totally right in front of us. Um, because you were influenced by your parents, our parents, to go for this. If it had been probably up to you at the time, it probably would have been easier just to study for your bar mitzvah rather than to have this additional learning experience.
That's probably true. Um, growing up, everybody's parents is a big influence. One of the things that made the difference in terms of the things that I did, we didn't have much money while we were growing up.
Right.
Mom and Dad worked really hard at weird and odd jobs. They were always looking to do better. Um, Dad, um, in one part of my mind, it was almost like a joke. Every year, he had a different job.
Yeah.
He was always trying to do better. And so he would move on and on and on. And he struggled like that right up until I was about 13 years old, till things started clicking. And most of his successes clicked for him through friends that had opportunities to offer him. At Beth Aaron, first of all, he volunteered a lot and he made connections with people.
Sure.
And he met a man named Phil Chapnick, and Phil owned his own business. I believe it was mufflers that he made and sold.
Right.
And Dad went to work for him. Once Dad had the connections, he was a very capable person, our father.
Right.
He had a tremendous range of skills, but he didn't have the connections through most of his life. He had a lot of rich relatives, but they didn't have a way to empower him. And what Dad did for me, when he saw the way he was empowered through connections and through the synagogue, he really encouraged me to get involved with the youth group. And by being involved at a leadership role with the youth group, they would subsidize my way to do things that I could have never have done
Right.
because Mom and Dad didn't have the extra money. Now, part of that was frustrating because they wanted us to be more socially mobile. But I remember going to school at Mumford High School where the girls wore cashmere sweaters, and after school hours, the guys would go to play golf. And I couldn't do those things, but I was in association with these people that were important for my parents, not as much for me.
Right.
So it was a love-hate type thing that was going on there. Well, I did find success in the youth group, again, being pushed there by Mom and Dad. And I was so successful in the youth group, and had acknowledgments and everything, but I had to make a choice. And I chose the youth group, and that meant that I wasn't spending time with my studies in school. And I almost didn't graduate high school. And when you think of parents wanting their kids to do the best, sure, Mom and Dad wanted me to be an AB student, and I probably could have, but they were allowing me to get away with it because I was having so much success.
Right.
And I did make a lot of connections through the USY, the youth group of the synagogue. And that really fashioned such a big part of my life, as did the part of not doing well in school. When I finally came to my senior year, my counselor, who created some influence in a negative way, she called me into the office and she said, Gary, why are you even still in school? You're wasting your time. You'll never graduate and you'll never be able to make anything out of yourself. So I dug my heels in a little bit. My senior year in high school, I was still getting D's, and I was going to graduate by the skin of my teeth. And many of the friends that I had around me, they were going to University of Michigan,
Right.
Michigan State, nice colleges where I couldn't afford to go anyways. And I would have normally gone to Wayne State University, but my grades prohibited me from going there. So I found Highland Park Junior College and I chose that. But I still was in a mindset of finding uh, my way with the youth group, even though I was 18 and graduating
Sure.
high school. And during that year, I became president of the regional youth group. And I felt like a star because to get that position, very few people, well, there was only one president of the group each
Right.
year. So I continued to downplay my education at junior college. And believe it or not, I flunked out of college the first year. And mom and dad wouldn't have liked that at all. And I lied to them. I kept telling them, oh, everything's okay. But when I got the notice in the mail that they didn't want me back,
Whoa.
what did I just felt embarrassed. I felt awful. Uh, but I needed to do something. And it still wasn't clear to me. Well, then the next person who had a major influence and changed my life was Shelley. She was someone that I dated, and I eventually married her. But we had lunch one day, Shelley, her mother, Mary, and myself. And they both told me that nobody wants a loser and that I needed to go to school and get a profession. Mary had been a teacher, and she said that the one thing you can count on when there's a dip in the uh,
Economy.
financial world, yeah, you could always count on a job if you were a teacher.
Okay.
Well, how was it made good sense to me, but how were you going to go? Shelley and I started, you know, thinking that we would sometime be married, but she wasn't not going to have any part of me at all if I didn't make something of
Sure.
myself. I looked around town. The only place that was available for me, having flunked out of college, was one of the schools that had higher tuitions. They'd gladly take my money and admit me into the school. Well, I was working one or two jobs. I wasn't making a lot of money, and I had to spend all the money I made in order to get admission. And I went to Detroit Institute of Technology. It was located in the YMCA in downtown Detroit. Wasn't easy to get to, but all of a sudden I had this goal. And I knew that I couldn't be with Shelley if
Right.
I didn't have a certificate. when my attitude changed, all of a sudden at DIT, I'm getting all A's. The same classes that I flunked out of at Highland Park. I went to DIT for 1 year. Then I applied to transfer to Wayne State University, which was much cheaper. And then I gained admission. I think I was a probation student. But even at Wayne, which was a respectable upper class school,
Sure.
I was able to make good grades. And then I did pursue education, and I came across a, a man when I was doing student teaching. His name was Nate Fine. He was my supervisor. And he was such a dynamic teacher, and he had so much faith in me that I found it a lot of fun. I found it interesting. I worked with him for the better part of a year. And after I graduated, I went on to a career as a teacher.
Yeah.
Now, being a man and having a degree in elementary education, I was highly sought after because 90% of the teachers in schools were women.
Right.
And even though they were good teachers, it was a different dynamic to have a man in the classroom. And so I went on and I became a teacher in the public schools. And I learned a lot when I was a teacher in the public schools. The way public schools ran, I learned that I didn't like being a part of it. So it wasn't a particular person that taught me a lesson. It was the experience. Um, Many of the older teachers in the school, it seemed to me as though they were getting by till the day they could collect their pension.
Right.
I didn't like that at all. Um, Kids who didn't perform to the top of their ability were given timeouts. They were sat in the corner. Uh, I knew people were different. I was different. And so I approached teaching differently. Um, I was influenced by another man teacher who had a room across the hallway. His name was David Strom. David was teaching sixth grade. I was teaching fifth grade. David took all of the textbooks and put them in a cabinet and locked it. What he used for everything he taught, math, history, composition, all of these things, he every day, he had 36 kids in his class. He received 37 copies of the Detroit News and the Detroit Free Press. And he wrote all of his lesson plans from using information in the newspapers. And as
Interesting.
you can imagine, everything is right there.
Right.
And because that little tweak that he used, his kids were amazing. Uh, they were very proud, and they worked even harder to show that this was a great way of learning. So I took some of those tips from my friend across the hall, and I tried to influence the system by bringing ideas and I became fifth grade level chairman for the whole district. And I tried bringing these ideas, but even there, as being one of the planners,
Sure.
I was knocked down every time. Uh, People wanted to do it the way things had always been done. And I taught public school 2 years in Oak Park. Then I went to Detroit and I taught math and science for 2 years. That was even worse. In Detroit, I was teaching in the very far northwest corner of the city. This was in 1965, 1966. It was during the period when Martin Luther King was marching to gain recognition and for the rights of Black people. I guess one of the people that influenced me the most was the principal of the school in Detroit. Her name was Beatrice Wade. Beatrice probably became a teacher in the late 30s, early 40s.
Okay.
She was the biggest bigot you'd ever want to meet. The community where I was teaching had been all upper class Jewish families, but it was at a time when the whole city was transforming.
Right.
And now the upper class Black community was moving into Northwest Detroit, and the Jewish population was moving to the suburbs.
Right.
They call it white flight, and that's what was occurring. Well, when these Black kids came into Northwest Detroit and the school that I taught in, Beatrice was just awful the way she treated these people. Another thing that became obvious to me as a teacher, I had a large group when I first started of these middle class, upper middle class, white Jewish kids.
Right.
They had performed tremendously in school. They were all A's and B's all the time. When these other kids came in, they were underperforming, but it wasn't their fault.
Right.
It was a general oppression by teachers on kids, thinking that they're not capable of. And so these kids that were coming in, I would have a typical fifth grade student that had been in the inner city schools and now came here, and they should have been fifth grade. They were operating on a first or second grade level. And you couldn't put them into a fifth grade book because you have to learn the basics before
Right.
you can do the next. So all of these things really influenced me, the way I saw people. And I realized at the time too that in the way I grew up, I didn't have a Black friend, not one Black friend. The only Black person I knew was the lady Tempe who came to iron our clothes.
Yes. Yes.
That was the full experience. One of the things that impressed me is when I worked at the school in Detroit, there were a few other teachers who were Black, and we became fast friends. And they were a different experience to me. And they broke every stereotype that I had learned, and was fostered on TV. You know, the big thing on
Sure.
TV at that time was Amos and Andy,
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
two clowns.
Right.
And, you know, so, geez, so much influence. And it really made a big difference for me. The first time that I ever became part of a group that had a number of Black participants in the same group was when I found Scrabble.
How interesting. Yeah.
The Scrabble community, in my opinion, besides the game, was the greatest community and is the greatest community. And you see people's ability to use words and to play the game. If you asked me to name off some of my Black friends, I don't even see them as Black.
Right.
I don't see them as white. Uh, it's just amazing. And uh, I have good friends of all kinds and everywhere. And uh,
You know, it's interesting that you describe it that way because when we were growing up, at least the first home I remember, it wasn't your first home, um, but when we lived on North Lawn in Detroit, um, basically it was a very Catholic area. Yet
right.
on our street, there were probably a half a dozen Jewish families, which I just figured out not too long ago. Um, from our cousin who lived down the street, and the Resnicks, and Stevie Seltzer, and us, and a couple others.
Yeah, I guess
Um,
so.
so it's sort of strange, but you're right. Um, the only Black person that I actually knew was Tempe, who um, would come and iron our clothes for us. And only because our mother was working. Okay. I don't think if our mother had not gone back to work, um, you know, we would have had even Tempe in the house. Because again, we weren't like a lot of other Jewish families that had a little bit more money. But it's interesting that we grew up in a very white bread community, and yet you and me and our brother Joel, um, when we describe our friends, we describe them individually, but not by color, and sometimes not even by gender. They're just people who we are friends with. Um, and they may have a talent, they may have something special to talk about. Um, but I just find it interesting that we grew up that way, and we're diverse. And yet so many people today are still questioning, should I be that person's friend because they're Black, they're Asian? So what do you think influenced us to be a little bit more open-minded?
I can't talk for you and Joel, but you know, there comes a time when kids and their parents butt heads. It's like when you're trying to break away.
Right.
Our mother, more than our father, was a bigot. She was a representative of a group of people that were very clannish. And I think that was very typical of people who came to this country. When the Jews came to this country, they lived near other Jews. The Italians came to this country, they lived near other Italians.
Right.
They had all their connections and their uh, prejudices that were part of them. Now, if I called Mom a bigot, she would stand up, dig her heels in, and said, "I'm not a bigot," because they couldn't even see that in themselves.
Right.
I'm reading a book right now that was written by Barack Obama, and he's explaining his life. Now, here, he was biracial. His father's from Kenya, very black. His mother's from Kansas, very white. His mother marries Barack, the father.
Right.
He was named Barack also. And here is this boy growing up trying to figure out who he is. And his grandparents, the parents of his mother, are very white. They don't see him or treat him anything other than their grandson. But that's more confusing for him.
Right. Because he
And
doesn't look like them.
right.
Yeah.
And there are these things that you don't talk about. You know, you don't use um, the N word. You don't talk about race. And so in this book, I only read the first part. Here he is growing up and trying to figure out who the heck he is. When his father was with him only the first 2 years of his life and went back to Kenya, I guess his mother divorced at that time. And the next man in her life is Muslim, brown, and is from the he lives in Indonesia, in Jakarta. And Barack lived there with his mother and this man who liked him and became like a father figure to him.
Okay.
But it was like the squalor that you see in India that surrounded him. It was a place where people might knock on your door every day begging for money or
Right.
food. He was totally confused. And for me, coming back to my interaction with Mom, especially during those 16, 17, 18, we argued frequently. And I called her out on it frequently when there was somebody who she didn't want me being with.
Right.
She didn't hold back either. She didn't want me dating that girl because her ankles were too fat. She didn't want me dating a girl because we were on 7 Mile and Wyoming, and this girl lived on Dexter still. You know, Mom wanted us to mingle with the upper class, and we were nowhere near upper class.
Right.
And she experienced it in her own life. She and Dad tried to be social with people from the synagogue. Well, many of them, they would have a card night, or they would go bowling, or they would do whatever they did. And sometimes they would go out for a snack afterwards before they would go home. And Mom and Dad couldn't afford more than a cup of tea. And these people were having cheesecake and
Right.
whatever else they had. And Mom and Dad tried to say to them, let's all pay our own way so that, you know, and groups of people like that, I said, oh, no, let's put it on one check
Right.
and we'll split it equally. Well, they couldn't pay their portion. And so they experienced that. And I know it bothered them, but they were pushing me into the same experience. So when you're with a group of school kids all day long, and the end of the school day comes, and they're going to take dance lessons or they're going to play golf, and I had to go to work, take 3 buses to get home, and then to do my homework. Come on. But they didn't think that way. They, you know, just tough it out, you know.
So obviously, one of the lessons you learned, and I've seen it with you and your children, um, it's not putting your needs, your beliefs on them. You may not always agree with your kids on the choices they make, but they're their choices.
That's true. And, you know, it's it's a hard thing to do, especially if your kids are making choices that you don't agree with. Uh, but I don't know any other way to do it, because if you're trying to impose your will on others and they're pushing back, there's estrangement that goes out there.
Exactly.
I enjoy the good feeling relationship that I have with all my kids. Um, when I had a lot myself, I shared it, you know, easily. Right now, I'm in a different position, and so I don't share, but I still share time when I can, and it feels good.
And, and I think that's a great lesson that you've learned and I've seen through you that um, you're constantly learning. Okay. You
Hmm.
didn't stop learning when you graduated Wayne State. Okay. In fact, you went on for your master's degree, but it wasn't even so much the um, formal education. You just kept finding other ways to learn things. Um, and I know uh, when we would get together, sometimes, uh, you would, and I want people to understand, my brother loves to be a jokester. Um, you like to pull one over on us. And so
Yeah,
sometimes you'd be giving us, this story about something that's happened. And it's
I
only half
learned
true.
I l- I learned how to tell stories like that from Donald Trump.
Oh, this was before Donald Trump, but we know. But you at least admit, hey, it's not a real story. But in order to do that, you have to know things, okay? Um, and it's like we've talked when in your Scrabble podcast, um, you can put a phony down and fool somebody with that word on the board. Um, but you have to be smart enough to know how to do that rather than just, throw tiles down on a board.
Good, a good practice for that kind of thing is the game Balderdash. Did you ever play Balderdash?
It's been a long time.
Yeah. So uh, someone puts out a word that other people may not know, and you give it a definition, which may be true or may be phony.
Okay.
And then the other people in the circle vote for whether it's
Real or not.
real or not real.
Ah, okay.
And so, you can make up a word like Nagultrum and say it's a piece of horseradish.
But we really know it is some form of money.
Yes, it
Yes,
is.
I
Good for
remember
you.
that.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a fun way. And yeah, I like to take things, and the more spontaneous it is, someone says something over there and it sort of tickles your brain and you think of something outrageous to say. And
Right.
sometimes the more outrageous it is, the more it's believed.
Yes. I do know that. Our mother used to do that, except I don't think it was so much that she really thought it through. It was just something that would hit her, and then she'd come up with um, a definition or a story for it. But I'm really impressed that, and this is what I wanted this podcast to be about, is for us to, dig deep and realize that we do learn lessons throughout our whole life.
We
Um,
do.
and some of those lessons, are painful. They're not always the happiest lessons, but they can take us to the next part. They can take us to that fork in the road and make us decide, are we going to go right? Are we going to go left? Are we just going to stop in our tracks?
Mm-hmm.
Um, as I said in the beginning, spending 11 weeks with our mother as she was dying and didn't even know that she was dying, um, she taught me a lot of lessons. But the most important lesson she taught me was, despite her bigotry, which she never would have admitted to and didn't recognize, she had the biggest heart of gold. And she loved her three children the exact same. And growing up, and I'm sure you may have felt this way too, Gary, um, we have a middle brother, and he always seemed to be the highlight of everything that went on in our family. Um, but I found as I talked to her, um, yeah, he was a highlight because that was his personality. But the things that she said about all three of us, in fact, she told me she had six children, but she only talked about three of us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, I just found very enlightening.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that the lessons you learned, um, helped you become the person that you wanted to be.
Oh, sure. And sometimes I find myself in the middle of doing something, and all of a sudden a memory floats by of, where did I learn this, or where did I think of this before? And yeah, uh, a lot stems from childhood and from, other experiences that made big impressions on me. And
Absolutely.
so I find that very fun. And I've worked at um, coaxing my memory by trying to remember all the kids that lived in all the houses going up and down around North Lawn, and all the teachers that I had that made an impression on me from elementary through high school. And what's really exciting to me is that as a teacher, I've been part of other students' lives, and every now and then someone contacts me. There's a girl that live a girl, a woman in her 60s that lives not too far away from me, who found me on Facebook and wrote, "Are you the Mr. Moss who," she was in my class as a fifth grader.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I remember before I came to California, I went to get some glasses from an optometrist at the Pontiac Mall. And I'm sitting in the chair, and this doctor comes, leans in towards me. It's Mr. Moss. She was one of my students
Oh,
at Key Elementary. Uh, those kinds of things are just so much fun. And then to hear them tell how I influence them, uh, it's like we give and take. It's the exchange, and
It is.
it it's just fun to know that people remember you, that you made an impression on them.
Absolutely. Well, I want you to make another impression on people. So I'm going to invite them to go to your website, which is just for the spell of it. And four is the number four. And I also want you to check out Gary's podcasts. We do them weekly. Um, and even though we talk about Scrabble, it's about life. Um, and I mean, I've gained so much out of the podcast. And a lot of times it has nothing to do with where to place the words on the board. But even when you talk about making lists, okay, of words to get to, to remember the words or making flashcards to remember something. I use those concepts in so many other parts of my life.
Mhm.
And today at work, I had some uh, flashcards that I was using, and somebody came over to me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I can't remember everything about every computer here, but I've got my little flashcards and it's got notes that help me." And they said, "What made you decide to do that?" And I told them to go listen to your podcast
Mhm.
because flashcards can be used for so many things.
Mhm.
So I encourage everybody. And if you listen in on the podcast, you'll learn more about Gary's lessons learned and the lessons we can learn from Gary.
I hope you do join me on the podcast. And if it brings up questions for you, just send me an email. I'm happy to respond.
Well, again, have a great day. Happy belated Thanksgiving.
Yes,
Uh,
happy Turkey Day.
and I'm glad it's behind us because all those side dishes, I think I put on a few pounds. So in the meantime, I'm going to learn some lessons. And one of those lessons is to go exercise. So have a great day.
Okay,
Bye bye,
bye.
everybody.